eating often is horrible for insulin, which is horrible for your metabolic health. It's also bad for your digestion because if you think about the digestive process that has to happen, if you're eating 6 times a day, you're basically digesting all day long. So
Right.
when are those cells and those parts of your body taking a rest, like and able to regenerate and repair? Because that's what happens in our bodies all the time.
Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self Loved Woman podcast. Hey, welcome. It's Jen Barnes. I'm so glad you're here. I have a super special episode queued up today. Today we have Charis Sederberg, who's going to talk to us about some really cool body stuff that impacts ADHD women. So I'm so glad she's here. Welcome, Charis.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. It's awesome to
Of
be here.
course. Yeah, of course. It's so great to have you. So I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about yourself because you know your history better than I do. So if you just share a little bit about your background so people know kind of what's happening here.
Sure, for sure. So I'll try and make it short. I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
mean,
as I get
you do
older,
you.
but
Everyone here has ADHD, so like we all know about info dumping, so you do you, okay?
sounds good. So I am a registered nurse. I have been for a little over 20 years now. And prior to that, I actually got a degree in exercise science too. So I have this big science background, nursing
Yeah.
cancer patients for my nursing career, which is just a
Mm.
gift. And it was definitely what I was meant to do. When I went to nursing
Oh,
school, I was like, this is my calling to take care of
oh.
people. Yeah. So that's always a great feeling, right?
Yeah.
But then really it was my own health was suffering a little over 10 years ago. I had two babies a year apart. My boys are a year apart.
Oh,
Yes, that
that's
was a little bit
intense.
of a shock to the system in my late 30s, actually. And then I was 40 when I had my youngest. So definitely rocked my world quite a bit. And my body really kind of took a toll. And I was having a lot of trouble getting help with like what was going on. My energy was terrible. I couldn't lose the baby weight. Had horrible digestive things, which really that had been going on since my childhood that I kind of just ignored or just
Yeah.
dealt with it, right? You just think, oh, I just have bloating or have constipation or whatever. And so I really just couldn't get any answers in medicine. And, I had access to amazing physicians. A lot of them were my friends, people I worked with. And I just would kind of start to do my own research. So I did like a popular elimination diet, and it really changed my life. It really made me view nutrition and digestion differently. And I will say it wasn't the end all be all for me. I had to do a lot more investigation and kind of work to help myself even more, but it was the beginning of the journey I'm on now. So that led me to go to the Nutrition Therapy Institute, which is a holistic nutrition therapy school in Denver, Colorado. Um,
Cool.
and really just was going to be for me to heal myself. And then once I was in school, literally my mind was blown. I was like, how can I have all this science knowledge and physiology knowledge about the body and I don't know any of this? And I just couldn't believe it. So I was like, I have to share this with other people. There's lots of people suffering. I would tell people what I was doing and they're like, oh my gosh, I need your help, or I need resources. And so I started my own practice. And so I have a holistic nutrition therapy practice, which, it's interesting. I thought so many times about like dropping the nutrition part, which is a really important part, but it's so much more than nutrition. And that's really what holistic means, right? It's like viewing the person as a whole person, not just
Yeah.
physically, but emotionally and everything that kind of encompass their health, and viewing their health in as the bird's eye view is really what I.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Well, and a few things come to mind for me. One thing that comes to mind is like, I was listening to you talk about you just thought that's how your life was. And I got to tell you, as someone who has struggled on and off with digestion through most of my life, that's what I hear most women say is it's just like, oh, women, our digestion just isn't great, especially after 40, which actually I invited Charis to come on the show to talk about ADHD and perimenopause, but then I learned she had all this other amazing stuff about holistically treating the body and healing digestion type things, and I thought that would be fabulous. But you're not wrong. It is such a common experience for women, right?
It is. I mean, I tend to take most of my clients are women. I do have some male clients
Yeah.
that refer to me, but really the key for me and I did a lot of different healing things. I took extra certification courses trying to understand really kind of where I wanted my place to be and my practice to be and how to take care of people. And really for my own health too. It wasn't perfect. And it
Right.
this course that was really geared towards the gut and GI health. And it was like all the light bulbs came together. And even
Mm.
though I don't really practice the way that I learned in that course, and that's kind of how I am, I just kind of tend to take all the information and all the things I learned and make over the course of the last 30 years and make it my own. And really, that's kind of what makes what I do a little bit unique, I think. But it's really the foundations are the same. So the reason the digestion is so important is because that's how we extract nutrients from our food. So
Oh,
nutrients,
yeah.
like no one talks about nutrients. I mean, maybe a little bit more now than they used to, but most doctors don't have any nutrition training. And a lot of people think of nutrition as a macronutrient situation. So we're talking about carbs, protein, and fat. And yes, that is very important on a lot of levels. But what I'm talking about is the nutrients of vitamins and minerals and fatty acids, which come from the fats we eat, and amino acids, which come from the protein we eat. Those nutrients have to be pulled out of the food and absorbed into our body because they are used for all the biochemical processes in our body, day in, day out, every single moment of every single day. Those are used as cofactors in all these biochemical processes. So there's a lot of understanding now about like B vitamins or magnesium and things like that. And those are just like skimming the very surface of what I'm talking about. So
Right. Well,
really,
yeah,
when someone has broken down digestion or dysfunctional digestion, they're not extracting those nutrients and they potentially aren't absorbing the nutrients too. So, from an ADHD perspective, the way I kind of view this, so just to let your listeners know, I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I relate to a lot of the characteristics and the things that people with ADHD suffer from. Especially in the last like 5 years, I've been like, oh, that's me, And I have two, my boys, both of them, one of them in particular, I know that he has ADHD. He would be diagnosed if I were to go that route and have him diagnosed. And so I've learned a lot about this. And I think what I'm talking about for people with ADHD is you just have to be a little bit more, I don't know if careful is not the right word, but a little bit more intentional, right? Because your system and your wiring and your brain works just a little bit differently than other people. But I feel like I even heard you say that on one of your podcast episodes, and it's not the right word, right? It's just
it's unique.
right. The way our brains work, we just have to be a little bit more intentional. So, for example, so if I skip a meal, if I don't eat protein at a meal or something like that, I feel that more than someone who doesn't have the kind of brain that I have, for example. So,
Totally.
it's just the reason to focus on digestion. And I think your comment about people living with these symptoms, it's I mean, I used to be kind of surprised by it, and I'm just not anymore. Every person is like, oh, yeah, for the last 20 years, I've had bloating, or the last 20 years, I've suffered from constipation. I mean, these are things, and I think the message oftentimes in the media or with medicine is just you just take a pill, right? Or you just take something over the counter. And really, my story was like, I would go somewhere. I remember this one time, I don't remember where we were with my husband. We were somewhere for the weekend. And I went out to Mexican was always a huge trigger for me.
Yeah.
And I had, kind of cleaned up my diet in that sense to know what I could eat and what I couldn't eat. But
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to eat anything, anytime, right? And so the margarita mixed with the cheese enchilada or whatever it was totally did me in. And I went to the drugstore, and spent $50 on Gas X and Imodium and all the things, and none of it did anything for me because
Right.
those band-aids of those drugs weren't going to fix the problem. And when I finally got to that point, I was like, okay, this is bigger than just me masking these symptoms, and I don't want to live like this anymore. And what I hear people tell me all the time, once we work together and they feel better, or if they've done their own work somewhere else or something, they don't even realize how bad they felt before, because they
Mm.
feel so much better now. And we've just suffered with these symptoms for so long. And so my message that I'm always trying to tell people is, you do not have to suffer. Like, this does not have to be this way for the rest of your life. Yes, I do agree that some people with constipation especially kind of trend to be a little bit slower movers, if you
Yeah.
want to call it that. And we didn't really talk about this, but I talk about poop a lot. Like, it's like a vital sign for me. I tell people that up front. Like, I'm like, you're going to tell me some personal things, and remember that I'm a nurse, so I've seen a lot of things that you don't even ever want to know about. And I don't look at it as gross or anything. It's just a bodily function. It's like that kid's book, Everyone Poops or whatever.
Well, I don't know how you can talk about digestion without talking about poop,
You
because poop
literally
is one indicator about the quality of your digestion. I mean,
exactly.
it just tells the story.
It
It's
is.
like, oh, okay. Hey, I've got some rabbit poops. I'm a little constipated. Ooh, I haven't been drinking enough water. I mean, that's not the only thing, obviously, but yeah. So I hear something inside of this, right? So as a woman with ADHD, I take like the supplements, I take fish oil, I take some Ayurvedic herbs, which for those of you who don't know what Ayurveda is, it's a sister science of yoga that was like homeopathic medicine in India before they had modern medicine still used. I take all these things, and then also I've read things like avocados are really good for the ADHD brain, right? But what I hear you saying is if my digestion isn't optimal, then
Mhm.
I can eat and take all that crap in the world, but it's not going to do me any good.
Yeah. And so
Or yeah.
I really try to not use complete generalisms, although it's just so
Yeah,
easy. That's what we always
for
say.
sure.
For
Yeah.
example, like, let's say you don't digest fats very well, but you're
Uh-huh.
taking the fish oil and you're taking it twice a day, or you're really trying to, beef up your stores and get all those good, healthy fatty acids in there. You're going to still absorb probably some of that. It's really never not all or nothing. I've seen
Okay.
very different cases of that. So it's not completely lost, but it could be way better. If
Oh,
the
okay.
digestion
Yeah.
was improved. So, for example, one indication of poor fat digestion, well, bloating is one, but bloating could be anything. I mean, it
Right.
literally could be lots of things.
Right.
Is, does your poop float? So, if you look in the toilet after you have a number two and your poop is floating, whether it's the little rabbit pebbles or, quote unquote normal poop, and we can talk about what that means if you want, but
Uh-huh.
if it's floating, that's an indication that you have higher fat in your stool and it's not being absorbed. So,
Oh, okay. I'm like, is my poop supposed to float?
um, it's
I'm like,
not.
it
Let's
doesn't.
talk about that for a second. So, there's this great chart called the Bristol stool chart. You can Google it. I actually learned about this in nursing school, which is kind of
Uh-huh.
cool. I'm not sure I really even used it as a nurse, but
Uh-huh.
I use it all the time now. So the Bristol stool chart is basically categorizing your poop in numbers 1 to 7, and it gives you a picture. And so the picture, of course, speaks 1,000
Ooh.
words, and that helps you to be like, oh yeah, I'm a number 3 or I'm a number 5. And so the number 4 poop is the big, I'm going to say big, and I'll explain that in a second, log style poop that sits in the bottom of the toilet. That's really
Okay.
the goal. And
Okay.
what I say by big is that a lot of times people don't feel like they can have a complete bowel movement. So they
Yeah.
go to the bathroom and a little bit comes out, and maybe it looks like a log and it sinks. And so that's great. But it's then 2 hours later, they're trying again, and 2 hours later, or something like that. Right. So that's
Yeah.
not 100% ideal, because we want the whole thing to come out at once. And there's a lot of discussion, and I hear doctors all the time say, oh, it's normal to not go every day, or it's normal to go a couple times a week. And I completely disagree
What?
with that. You have normal reflexes in your colon that, if you think about like how things move through, right? So the small intestine is kind of in the middle of your abdomen, and it's
Yep.
just, if you laid it out flat, it would be like the size of a tennis court, which is
That's what I thought. It's huge. Yeah.
crazy to think about, but that's where absorption happens. Okay. And that's why it's so big and has so much surface area. But the colon goes up your right side, over and down your left side.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when things are moving through, when you eat, that's part of the reflex of things continuing to move through your digestive tract. And so not going to the bathroom every day is a huge red flag, first of all. Secondly, you really, in Chinese medicine, the colon is most active between like 5 and 7 in the morning. So ideally, the sun is coming up, your brain is seeing that, right? Your
Uh-huh.
bowels are emptying, and you're preparing to eat your meal. But what happens a lot of times, right, is people are drinking their coffee so that they can go to the bathroom, or exercising will sometimes stimulate that too. And that's okay. But this is what people do. They're so used to just doing this. And I'm in these camps. Like, I'm completely non judgmental because I have lived all of this. And the other day, I don't normally drink coffee before I have my breakfast.
Mm.
And that's a whole nother rabbit hole we won't go in on, but I just have become, that's kind of become my practice. And
Uh-huh.
I was like, in the morning, like, oh, my husband had made some coffee. And so I was like, I'm gonna have some coffee. And I had to like stop myself, right? Because I was thinking to myself, like, I don't want to get back into that habit of doing
Right.
that so that I can have a bowel movement.
Right.
The circadian rhythm is a whole nother topic, but our
Right.
body is wired on a 24-hour clock. And
Yes.
so
Well, and there's the Chinese clock too. Like, yeah, I
yeah,
see that and it's amazing, like, to look at.
and it makes so much sense if you think about it. And these are the things that I never learned in nursing school, and that I've
Right.
come to learn in the last 10 years, that is affected my own life in such an amazing way, and also just helped me to help other people. And the beauty of it is you have these things at your disposal that a lot of them don't really cost a lot of money.
Mm.
It's just kind of more of a like a habit or a practice that you do, just like you would do other things in your practice. So it's pretty awesome. That's what I love holistic health so much.
Yeah, well, I love it too. It's just how I think of things, right? Before we got started, we were talking about how often in medicine, there's everything's a specialty and the body is so separated. And especially as a mental health provider, by day, I see that, right? Like, and what I will say is like, I see the connection because as a trauma therapist, I now know a lot about autoimmune conditions, right? Because so many of my complex trauma clients, not that this is what we're going to talk about today, but like so many of my complex trauma clients have these quote unquote obscure, supposedly obscure, that don't seem obscure to me, autoimmune conditions to the point where I'm like, hey, have you ever been tested for POTS? And they go get tested and like, how did you know that? I'm like, I don't know. You act exactly like my other client with it, like, but it's just it's all connected, and I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, like, how it's all connected, because I think that's really important, especially with ADHD, because so much is like, "Oh, my brain is different, my brain is different, my brain is different." And again, different isn't my favorite word for it because it's just our brains are wired in their own way. But I
Right.
wonder if you could speak to that more, that approach to the body of being holistic.
Sure. So, the way that I really kind of had to view it for myself, and the way that I
Mhm.
teach my clients, is to really like honor your body. Okay. So, and when I say your body, I mean your mind and all of that too, but
Mhm.
yourself, honor yourself and what you need. So, for me, with my probably ADHD brain, I need a little bit more routine. I need kind of a regular process to go through. My body needs that to maintain the level that I want to live at. And so the interconnectedness of the body is just, you literally just cannot ignore it. People come to me with a digestive complaint oftentimes, but when I'm viewing them as a person, I'm really asking them so many different questions about so many different things. So first of all, we talked about digestion as the framework, and a lot of people are aware of the gut now and the importance of that. So we talked about the digestive process, extracting nutrients, obviously the microbiome, which is all of those billions or trillions really of healthy bacteria, and really some viruses and parasites too that live in our large intestine and do so many amazing things. That is just a very intimate connection with the body, and especially the gut-brain axis, which you have probably talked about before with your audience. But the gut-brain axis is really this kind of like two-way highway between your brain and your gut or your digestive tract. I kind of like to call it the digestive tract, but everyone knows it as the gut. It's just
Yeah.
so much more than just the microbiome
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
So if you think about the gut-brain axis and all the different things that are influenced by that, so many of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut. What would happen if our digestion is dysfunctional? Or what if we have dysbiosis, which is like overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria or
Like
fungal
candida.
overgrowth? Yeah, fungal is a candida, is a fungal overgrowth, or an insufficient microbiome. Maybe all our healthy cells down there aren't at the level they should be. All of those things are going to affect our brain. They affect our mood. They affect literally everything. So that the gut brain connection is one way to look at the connectedness of the body. Also, kind of as a segue to that, the nervous system. So, our nervous system is wired to protect us. It's wired to, I mean, obviously the brain is very complex from a cognitive standpoint, but when we're thinking about more of like primal things, like really, are we running from the lion or are we like chilling out in the recliner, and in our normal everyday life, we're not really running from the lion very often, but our nervous system really doesn't know the difference.
Right.
And so we are kind of in this what's called sympathetic tone. So sympathetic is just the sympathetic nervous system that just helps the hormones and all the things help your body to run from the lion. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is really called rest and digest. And that's not really an accident. And it's because digestion has to occur in that state. So if you
Yep.
think about just like I think about when my kids were younger and I would be like getting them meals and things, I would be wandering around the kitchen eating off their plates or eating from the bowl or whatever, not sitting down to eat, not relaxing, or in the car on the go. This is what people do day in and day out. And that affects our digestion immensely. So,
So
yeah,
you're saying when I eat my breakfast in the car on the way to work, it's not good for my digestion?
it is not ideal for your
Can
digestion.
you say more about that? I hate to I'm sorry to interrupt. I think
No.
we all know I have ADHD, but anyway, but, like,
Yes.
say more about that. Say more about why that's a problem, because I notice I digest better when I do sit down at home and eat,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's hard to get myself to do it.
Right. So the reason is because if you think about the hormones and the things in a sympathetic when you're in a sympathetic tone. So, the thing is it's kind of like what we were talking about before, like generalizations and extremes. Like you're not necessarily sympathetic or parasympathetic. They're fluctuating kind of back and forth. And you can actually get yourself into like a parasympathetic tone pretty quickly with breathing.
Yeah.
There's so many wonderful breathing studies out now, and you probably know
Yeah.
this
We
with all
talk
your
about that stuff all the time. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so that's one method I use with clients to help them, because our reality is that our lives are busy. Our life, like we're not going to just turn into these like, oh, I'm going to lay around for half an hour before I eat my lunch, and then I'm going to lay around for another half an hour so I can digest. Like that's not reality, right? Like, but we can teach our body through the signals that we give it to kind of shift gears a little bit. So the reason that you can't digest is because if you think about it in extreme circumstance, if you're running from the lion,
Yeah.
you have those hormones running through your system. You're kind of revved up. You know what that feels like in the morning, on the way to work, whatever. That your digestion just doesn't happen. Your
Yeah.
body doesn't prioritize digestion, because if you really were running from the lion and they're like eating a piece of I don't know, like some animal meat or something, I'm thinking like the paleo
Yeah.
diet,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
your body is like, no, you would feel horrible. Like, have you ever been like starting to eat a meal and got like really bad news or had something really horrible that you just heard about?
Yeah.
And literally the food just sits in your stomach like a brick and it doesn't go anywhere?
Yeah.
It's kind of an extreme example, but that's kind of what happens all the time. I
Yeah.
have one of my kiddos eats really fast.
Yeah.
And so he will be like, "Oh, my stomach, I just don't feel like I'm digesting." And I'm like, "That's because you just inhaled your food." So the key with that really is to look at the situation. So the thing is that your morning breakfast, if you eat it in the car often, is often different than your lunch, right? Which is different than your dinner. And so pick what I encourage people to do is pick one meal that you want to work on. And maybe breakfast is too hard right now, because if you are eating it in the car, that's okay. Maybe pick your lunch and decide that you're going to, I think first thing you need to do is assess how you're eating. So how fast am I eating?
Mm-hmm.
How much am I chewing my food? So if you look it up online, they're going to say you need to chew your food like 15 to 25 times a bite. No one does that.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's insane. That's like would take a half an hour just to chew one bite. Like, come on. Okay, not
So
a
it's
half an
very unrealistic to go from chewing 2 or 3 times per bite to doing that much. So I like people to like, what am I doing now?
hour.
And it
Uh-huh.
depends a little bit on what you're eating sometimes. If you're eating a big piece of meat, you're going to chew it more, obviously, than if you're eating something else. But how much am I chewing? How long am I really sitting down to eat? What else am I doing while I'm eating? And
Yeah.
then trying to integrate some steps. So let's say, for example, because this is the classic, is eating at your desk. And again, like I'm in these camps, so I'm not the one preaching over everyone. I have to practice these things day in and day out. And if I don't, I feel it too. So my classic with lunch or with someone at their desk at work is to sit down. I sit down, which is better than I used to be. And I do slow down. So taking 3 deep breaths, I like 3 as kind of like the starting number. You might need a few more than that. I really like the 2x breath, which is breathing in to the count of 2, breathing out to the count of 4. It seems
Mhm.
to down regulate things really pretty quickly. You don't have
Yeah.
to hold anything, so there's no
Yeah.
holding. I don't like the holding thing. And doing that, sure, on the first day, you might not notice a big difference. On the third day, you might not notice a big difference. But if you do it every single day, within a week or two, you're going to notice your body is going to, it's almost like a switch. It's like, oh, I get it. Okay. So you combine that with slowing down, chewing your food more thoroughly. That sets up the digestive process. So the important thing to know about digestion is that it is a top to bottom like process. And so
Mhm.
everything that happens at the beginning sets up every next step. So
Oh.
classically, I do discovery calls with people and talk to them about, if I'm a good fit to work with them or if I could help them with what they're dealing with. And they complain about what I consider like high bloating. Okay, so that's like in your stomach pretty quickly after you eat. It might be accompanied with like belching. And oftentimes that is because you ate too fast. You didn't chew your food thoroughly. So if you think of the stomach is really supposed to have mostly digested food from the standpoint of it's chewed, right?
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, if it's not chewed, it takes up more room.
Well, and your stomach has to do that work by itself. And so it can get little, the musculature of your stomach, the churn and burn is what it's called. That can get a little bit more predominant, but sometimes doesn't feel very good. And then the really important part is the acidity of your stomach. So we have stomach acid that helps us primarily to break down protein, but it does help us break down all types of food. That acidity is to be of a proper level to go and move through into your small intestine. That
Mm.
is the trigger. And so if your stomach acid isn't at an appropriate level, or you haven't chewed your food and your body hasn't even had time to crank out some stomach acid, crank out some enzymes, it sits in there like a brick and it doesn't go anywhere. And
Whoa, hold on. That is mind blowing. I just want everyone to take a moment and just think about that. As
Mhm.
someone who learned to inhale my food in elementary school because we had 10 minutes for lunch,
Sure.
and I think like 15 or 20 in high school. I mean, that's ridiculous, by the way, because you have to stand in line. Anyway, whatever. But I've never been able to get myself to eat a lot slower. Not never, not never. It's harder for me to get myself to eat slower. And I have been intentionally trying to chew better and
Mhm.
whatever, but I do kind of inhale my food. And like I knew that wasn't good for me, but I never put that together that, it's sitting there because of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Y'all, that's huge, especially for us, like over 40 folks.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I'm 49 and your metabolism doesn't speed up necessarily after. I mean, you can do things to keep it
Mhm.
going, like exercise regularly. And, hey, that's a question I do have.
Yeah.
There was a time when I was a group fitness instructor and I worked for a certain healthy way of life a company. And this was in the 90s, and they talked about the importance of eating small, frequent meals. But then in Ayurveda, it talks about not eating your next meal till your previous meal is digested. And so, like, I wonder if you can speak to that at all, because here's what I do know with ADHD. If I let if I let my blood sugar drop, I can't focus for the worth a hill of beans. And that is an absolute. If my blood sugar goes, I can't even focus. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about that. Like, I'm genuinely curious for myself, but I suspect it probably is something a lot of us face.
100%. So, yes. So let's talk about the meals thing first. So
Yeah, yeah. Sorry,
I
that was like 5 questions all at
oh, that's
once.
okay. I mean, these are all kind of things that I have on my list that I wanted to address too.
Uh-huh.
And again, back to the interconnectedness of the body when we're talking about the blood sugar. But for meals, when I went and got my exercise phys degree, that I mean, you're supposed to eat 6 meals a day. This is in the low fat craze. I'm 52, so this is in like the early 90s,
Yep.
and all about macronutrients and calories in and calories out. Well, we know that a lot of that is just not the way that it is anymore.
Right.
And so that was really a blood sugar like management strategy to eat so often that you would keep your blood sugar more in check. So, I'm sure your audience probably knows, but normally, if let's say you eat like a balanced meal, it has protein, it has fat, and it has carbohydrate, and you're going to get a little blip of blood sugar,
Mhm.
which is also a blip of insulin, which is the hormone that helps manage blood sugar when you eat, and that's normal. But we don't want this all day long, right? Because
Oh, which is what happens when you do that.
exactly. If you're eating 6 times a day, you're getting at least six little blips on the graph of insulin. And really, this is an insulin thing. I mean, it is a blood sugar thing, but blood insulin is the response to blood
Right.
sugar.
Yeah.
So the reason that's not good is because your cells, insulin is like a key that helps your cells pull the sugar in and use them for energy. And when you are constantly giving your body insulin and insulin's being released, it gets desensitized. It just starts to become resistant. And that's what insulin resistance is. And this happens over time. It happens over decades. Like type 2 diabetes is not developed overnight. I mean, they're saying even in kids, starting, I was joking with someone the other day, it starts around 15 because your kids are teenagers and they're starting to eat whatever they want and they don't have their mom or their dad to govern that as much as they used to, right? So
They're
if you think,
snacking.
yeah, if you think about that as a 10 years to 25, 10 years to 35, 10 by the time they're 45, that's 30 years of potential blood sugar dysregulation. And that's what kind of sets up the stage for insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is really just the road to type 2 diabetes.
Right.
So you want insulin sensitivity, and then you kind of have this continuum as it gets worse and worse. If you're continuing to spike your insulin, like let's say you just all you ate was protein and fat, you never ate carbs, then you wouldn't have an insulin. But that's not how most people eat.
Yeah.
And so that's a really important thing to think about with blood sugar. And I know we're going to talk about hormones in a little bit, but that premise is important for women to think about when they get to that perimenopausal age. You have already had this 30 years of potential blood sugar dysregulation, even if it wasn't extreme, even if your diet was good, decent, whatever you want to call it, it's 30 years of that. And now
Right.
all of a sudden you're having normal female hormone changes, which
Yeah.
happen as part of going to menopause. And those two worlds collide. And in my mind, that is a huge part of our perimenopausal suffering, really, that not many people are talking about. And I don't know if you want to go into this now or not, but
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is
So are you
why.
saying that like can increase hot flashes or it can increase night sweats, irritability, that kind of stuff?
Yes, because insulin and estrogen in particular are very related. So estrogen helps make you more insulin sensitive. So when you're losing estrogen,
Hold on. Say that again.
insulin,
Estrogen.
so
Okay.
estrogen helps make you more insulin sensitive.
Oh, so when your estrogen is dropping because you're in perimenopause, you it's harder to be insulin sensitive.
Exactly. Exactly. And so if you have some degree, so remember this is a continuum. So on this side, if you're insulin sensitive, perfectly insulin sensitive. And on this side, let's say you're knocking on the door of type 2 diabetes. You haven't been diagnosed yet, but your labs and everything is just not looking good. Too
Uh-huh.
high blood sugars, too high fasting insulin, lots of, you know, symptoms, low energy, blood sugar dysregulation, feeling like you have to eat often, kind of some of these things. When your estrogen is also declining and you're somewhere on this side of the continuum, that's the worlds colliding, where the blood sugar dysregulation and the lowering of the fluctuating of the hormones, it's I cannot tell you like how impactful it is to have control over your blood sugar at this time.
That is amazing, and it's answering some questions for me and perhaps anyone else who's like me and you're like, "Wow, I really didn't have that many," like, I don't know, I'm like, "Yeah, I've got occasional symptoms of perimenopause, but I'm not noticing much." Like,
Mhm.
just the occasional night sweat, but not often, and then, like, all these other women in my life are so symptomatic, but, like, I have exercised consistently since I was 16. I've paid attention to what I put in my mouth for food and how whatever. And I will say, like, back in the 90s, I was doing the, because they said, like, oh, if you eat 6 times a day, it sparks your metabolism. And so I was doing that for a while. And then I noticed that wasn't working for me. And so I just stopped, like, in, I don't know, like 2011 or something. But I was just like, this doesn't work anymore. So I just stopped doing it. But, like, oh my gosh, that could be why I'm having less symptoms.
100%. And so the thing about
Oh,
exercise, I have an exercise science degree. So again,
uh-huh.
it was about weight loss or it was about performance. Like it was never about just really health. I mean, there was discussion that it was a healthy practice, lifestyle
Mhm.
practice. But what we're seeing now is that people who have like this great foundation of healthy exercise, and when I say exercise, really like I often refer to it as movement because
Yeah,
it
I do
really
too.
is, it can be walking, it can be cleaning your house, gardening, like moving your body in a way that when you do that, your cells have to become more sensitive to insulin too. So it just helps so much. Obviously, it helps burn off excess blood sugar rather than it
Right.
being stored. But it's also a much bigger picture than that. I mean, they've done so many different studies on autoimmune. People have less autoimmune disease when they're kind of these,
Huh.
I was going to use the word chronic, and that's not a good word, but like people have an established exercise or movement practice, so many different things. And really like it took me a while with my training and my education to kind of shift my brain to thinking that way about exercise. And it's back to honoring your body. Like, what can I do today, movement wise, to honor my body based on how I'm feeling, based on what I want to do? I live in the Rocky Mountains. So it's
Yeah.
like I look at the mountain, I'm like, want to go for a hike or go snowshoeing or whatever, and so I think that the exercise piece is so important, and so many people are just tend to be kind of adverse to it until you talk about using it as a strategy to really help you feel good, because those endorphins and all the things that you get, just like make it a part of your life. Like that's not a chore.
So I
um
love this conversation because I notice a lot of people seem to be like allergic to the E word or traumatized by it. I don't know which, maybe
yeah.
both. But so just my comment, and then I have a question. But like what I notice too is like if people can just focus on movement, and especially with ADHD, y'all remember we have interest-based nervous systems. So we are not motivated by consequences. So just because, Charis is like, oh, well, if you don't do this, I mean, she's not saying it like that. She's not being threatening at all. But
Mhm.
like, she's talking about the consequence of not moving your body. That doesn't tend to motivate us ADHDers. But what I like about what you said, Charis, is you're like, "Oh, I see the mountains and I'm interested in going for a hike." You didn't use the word interested, I'm adding that. But,
Yeah.
and so, if you're listening to this and you've been adverse to the E word, how can you move your body in a way that's interesting for you, in a way there's sparks joy or novelty or some of those things we've talked about, aligns with your passion, right? Like if you love horses, find a way to go horseback riding. I mean, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think there is no wrong activity, right? So like
Uh-huh.
I think a way to maybe think about it is like maybe think back when you were younger. Like, what kind of things did I enjoy? Because kids are just the perfect example of that, right? They have some energy to burn and they go run around outside, right? Or they could jump on the trampoline or whatever, right? Like adults aren't tend to be wired that. We kind of lose that. And not all adults, but a
Yeah.
fair amount. And
Yeah.
so what brings you joy? Like couple that with like some sort of being outside, I think is just moves the needle even more, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
a huge bang for your buck.
Yeah.
And my husband and I talk about our dog a lot. So I told you earlier, we call her the toddler. She's a little bit high maintenance, little lady, love her to death. But she's that one. Like if I don't do something for her in the morning, she wrecks my whole day. So that's just a non-negotiable. And so a lot of times I will take her to do whatever activity I want to do, which is
Uh-huh.
hiking or snowshoeing. But sometimes it's just getting a walk in. Like this morning, we got on earlier than I would normally if I was going to go hiking. So I took her for a walk and she ran around with our neighbor dog. And that brings me joy to see her so happy. So it's kind of like that, the saying of like with exercise, of like getting out the door or getting to the gym is, and the gym could be anything,
Right.
the hardest part. Like you
Yeah.
literally just getting yourself there is the hardest
Yeah.
part, right? Like once
Yeah.
you're there, you feel good, like you do your class
Exactly.
or whatever you're doing. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you have to do, is just bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, I plan it out, and my planning with how I'm going to set up my day, it's almost always in the morning, because if
Yep.
I save it for later, it doesn't happen.
Me too.
And I just learned that about myself. And so I think you have to do a little trial and error. You have to be consistent. I learned in school, like, oh, you shouldn't exercise every day, but I tell people you need to do something every single day. You literally
Yeah.
do. Like, even if it's just like for me, like a quiet day of movement would be like if I got up really early and did 15 minutes on the treadmill, just
Yeah.
like to get my heart rate up on a hill. Cause we live like there's a lot of animals out here and I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
really super keen on being in the dark because it's really dark. There's no street lights, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's different than like living in the city or the suburbs. But
Yeah.
so if I'm on the treadmill in the first thing in the morning, 15 minutes, and then like a 15-minute like wake up yoga or something like that, to me,
Yeah.
that's just a non-negotiable part of my day. And yes, it's exercise, yes, it's movement, but if that's the only thing that I do that day, that's kind of like a mellow day for me. But it might be a great way for anyone else to start. Just
Yeah.
pick something and try and be consistent, because you're going to notice a difference quickly.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always talk about is like when you're going to do movement, try and focus on how you're going to feel after, but then also start small, start with small steps. And one of the things that I got from Laura Vanderkam, she wrote a book called Off the Clock. She talks about a better than nothing goal, right? So her goal was to run a mile every day. And because she was a runner, that's not a big deal. If you're not a runner, you're like a mile. So for you, your better than nothing goal would be a walk around the block, maybe, right? But so she knew she could run for, what's that, like 10 minutes, at a slower mile, 12 at most, And so it was like building up. And so really, in a lot of ways, 15 minutes on the treadmill and some stretching if you're not into the word yoga, which I am, but whatever. Like, yeah, that's a nice way to do it. Okay, now I have a question for all those people who are like, great, I haven't started getting movement in. My perimenopause is out of control and it's making my ADHD worse because I'm so foggy in my brain. Is it too late for me? Like, because you said the 30 years helps. So talk a little bit about that. Because I've got some people I love very, very much who I'm going to make sure listen to this podcast, and I hope they do, because I want them to hear this, like how they can help their hormones.
It is never too late. Literally. I have clients in their 70s. I have a lady that's 81 right now and is like trying to fine tune some parts of her health. Like, right? That's to me, she's 30 years older than me. And I think, wow, that is amazing, right? So, no, it's never too late ever. I think an important premise, and this was very hard for me, is that you do not compare yourself to your younger self. I used to be a
Uh-huh.
runner, and I'm probably never going to be a runner again, and that's okay. But it took me a while to kind of come to terms with that, and that's okay. You just are like, that part of my life is over. I have all these other wonderful things that I do now. So it is absolutely never too late to start. As far as the blood sugar thing, you can reverse your blood sugar. So when I went to nursing school in 2003, I we were taught that type 2 diabetes was not reversible. And that
Oh,
as soon
I
as you
thought it
were
wasn't.
on, yeah, oh no, it is. So if you were on metformin, if you were on insulin, which is crazy because it's not really an insulin problem. Well, it is an insulin problem, but you don't need more insulin. It is not reversible. Like that's just your slow, progression towards horrible metabolic health, which affects everything in your body. And that is not true. So there's a doctor named Jason Fung. He's a nephrologist from Canada. He's
Uh-huh.
written many books. If you Google him or look at him up on YouTube, you'll probably find one of his most classic. He has a bunch of shorts now, but like a longer YouTube thing is about how insulin resistance is a hormonal disease, which it is because insulin is a hormone. um, but he basically in his clinic was taking care of a nephrologist is a kidney doctor. So
Yeah,
all these
yeah. Yep.
end stage kidney disease because of their diabetes and they're on dialysis and they're going to die and it's horrible. And he's like, this is ridiculous. So he basically started taking care of patients and treating them with fasting. And this kind of will go, we're going to talk about the meal thing in a second. This will say
Uh-huh.
great segue to that. Fasting, which most people are familiar with now, intermittent fasting, longer fasting,
Yeah.
and altering carbohydrates. So the reason that you alter carbohydrates is carbohydrates are really, remember what influence insulin the most. And so he literally started doing that. A lot of his patients were very low income, didn't have any money. So fasting is free. Altering your carbohydrate. People argue all the time about the price of food and that whole foods are more expensive. And I do not really agree with that. But, altering your diet basically from a macronutrient standpoint and eating more protein and fat and less carbohydrate. And he's reversing people's diabetes. And
Whoa.
I mean, I would absolutely look him up. He has multiple books, Obesity Code, Diabetes Code. He's written a couple fasting books. He's just, one of those people on the forefront to teach the medical community. I honestly feel like a lot of what he did helped the American Diabetes Association to change their viewpoint on diabetes. And people are not taught that anymore, that it's not reversible, which is amazing.
Oh,
And so if you think about, so like we have old cells that die and need to be recycled and moved out of the body, and new cells need to be formed. Like that is a normal physiological process that happens all the time. And if you're constantly digesting, your digestive system, the only time it's off is overnight.
Well,
And that is a problem.
right. There was a Ayurvedic clinical practitioner I used to know in Colorado Springs, and one of the things she talked about too is like you need to get the food in your belly digested before you're intaking more food because like you already have all this energy going down here. Now you don't want to these are my words. Like this is a horrible summary, but you don't want to steal the energy or focus from what needs to happen down here by now requiring digestive energy to be in your mouth again because you're ingesting something. And I was like, whoa. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying too, is like give the different parts of your digestive system a break. And then the ones who actually need to do the work at any given moment can do the work. And then that will result in, I hear you saying less bloating, less like you'd have those nice number 4 poops, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really want to make sure, I know you said it's never too late, but what about for the perimenopausal woman who is just like feeling crazy right now and
Mhm.
just like, I mean, those are words I hear women say. I'm not calling anyone crazy to be clear. But who are just like, I just need something to change. Could this help them? Like how fast could this help them? If they were like hardcore gonna like focus on nutrition and like some of these people already exercise, like, is this gonna take, like, 2, 3 years and then they're already in menopause? So no?
Oh
Same,
no.
would you speak
This
to
is
that?
people see results in sometimes a week, a lot of times several
Holy
weeks.
moly!
No, it's very quick. So, and I think so what I was saying for women with ADHD before that, we kind of, I need to feel like the best way to say this, but
Uh-huh.
we need, we can't let ourselves go off the rails quite as much, or we need a little bit more support, or however you want to look at it, right? We have less wiggle room, maybe is a good way to think about it too. That's how I kind of think about it for myself. You all This is what I like would encourage people to do. Look at your day. So maybe a work day is probably the best day to think about it. Weekends or non-work days are harder to, conceptualize
No
sometimes.
structure.
More erratic, yeah. But so like a more structured work day, what does your movement look like? And if you don't have a movement practice, what do you want to do? What do you want to try? Like, what are you interested in? What could you do? Could you just go for a walk? Most people can walk, especially if it's outside. Great way to start, right? And what is your diet like? So, balancing your macronutrients, like one of the most important things for ADHD is protein, like protein, protein, protein. And one of the things that people don't do is eat enough protein, especially women. That is, I mean, I would say I cannot think of a woman that have worked with that has eaten enough protein. And sometimes that's because people aren't digesting protein very well, and they may not even really realize it, that they kind of self select away from those foods. But protein is number one, balance throughout the day. I'm a huge believer in balancing nutrients too. So, like, if your only vegetable that you're eating is like a salad that you eat for lunch every day, that's great. But you really kind of need, to
Yeah.
spread the love a little bit throughout the day, because we
Well, because of those nutrients, right? The micronutrients.
absorb things. It's better to have them in our system kind of more, not continuously, because obviously, remember, we're not eating all day long, but like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, something like that. And so those two things, number one, adding protein to your meals is like a game changer. Like all of my clients within days notice a difference with that. And then just kind of fine tuning that to how much do you really need. I'm not a huge advocate in over protein. Like I know a lot of people are like, oh, 100 to 200 grams or whatever. That's a lot for most women. I'm 5'9", so I'm like a bigger person, but and so you kind of have to figure the nuance of that out. But like just start adding a little bit more protein. And then, the the big part too, I would say, I'm such a huge believer in circadian rhythm. I believe that I was a horrible sleeper for a long time as a function. It's funny, my boys are like, you can't blame that on us anymore. And they're like 12 and 13, almost 13 and 14 now. So, it's kind of like, yeah, you're right. I probably can't. But back then, I didn't sleep a lot. I didn't sleep very long periods of time. And so it really affected my sleep and then all of the other things that I had going on. So ever since I started thinking of my sleep as a 24-hour cycle, is a game changer. Go outside in the morning. So this can be part of your daily routine. Go
Uh-huh.
outside in the morning, go for a walk or do
Uh-huh.
something outside. Like I said, I walk my dog. She drags me out there sometimes, and then I'm fine once I'm there. But setting your looking at the sun, and a lot of people in Colorado, we're so lucky. We have beautiful days most
Oh
days.
yeah.
A lot of people maybe have a cloud cover or something like that. But if you're walking for 20 or 30 minutes outside, you're going to be outside long enough. The sunlight coming in through your eyes, so really this should be sunglass free for a good period of time. If it's bright sun, it can be 5 minutes. If it's cloudy, then it probably should be like 20. Those rays and that sunlight coming in tells your pineal gland shut down the melatonin. Hopefully your cortisol is already up a little bit because you're
Yeah.
awake, and it sets your circadian rhythm. And if you are
Um,
diligent and you do this every single day, if you're getting up a little later on weekends, which that's a whole nother story, but like I would say try and do this from the time the sun comes up, which here it's kind of like 7 right now. You're probably even later than that in Minnesota, but maybe by 9 at the absolute latest, guaranteeing that you do that sometime during that window of time. Every day, be consistent. You will notice a huge difference. You'll notice a difference in your sleep. You'll notice a difference in your digestion. The
wow.
I mean, it is a free, easy thing to do.
Wow.
Those three things, if you just think about those three things, and you don't have to do all three of them at once. You do what you can handle. And I'm a really huge fan of layering in habits.
Yeah.
So pick whatever feels right to you right now. Maybe
Yeah.
you don't want to think about food right now. So you go and do the circadian rhythm practice.
Yeah.
You do that and kind of get that in your normal daily routine. And then you start implementing the movement. And then you start implementing the nutrition. And within a month or two, you're a different person.
That's amazing. And so what I heard is the circadian rhythm practice, chewing
Mhm.
your food fully, getting
Mhm.
protein at every meal, and which I have to say, game changer for me with ADHD, I have to have protein. And I'm mostly vegan. But I have to have protein at every meal or I can't focus worth a hill of beans. And it's not meat. Like it's still, protein. But and then moving every day. I mean, those things, I mean, a lot of them don't have to be high budget items. And I know, some people maybe have a limited food budget for whatever reason. And like you said, there may be ways that you can still figure out how to get high quality whole foods that are not as bad. I know in Colorado, I remember I used to go to natural grocers there. They had a lot of really good stuff, really good quality, and it wasn't as expensive as if you went to like Whole Foods or something, right? But
Exactly.
there's all those ways. Wow. Charis, my mind is blown. I could talk to you for like another hour, but we're getting close to our hour here, so we should probably close out. Is there anything else you want to share?
Oh, I can't really think of anything. I mean, like we've talked about, there's so many different like little rabbit holes or slides we could go
Right.
down, which is so
Right.
fun. I mean, I talk about this stuff all day long, and I could talk
Yeah.
about it forever. It's really fun to have a conversation with someone. I would just say, kind of just reiterate what you just said. Like, it is not too late. If you are really suffering from perimenopausal symptoms, focusing on these foundations for your health is essential, because if you went to a doctor and they suggested that you do some hormone replacement therapy and you wanted to try it, there's no guarantee that that is actually going to really work if you
Mhm.
don't have the foundations in place. And
Yeah.
this is another thing about HRT that's not really discussed very much. And I had this experience. Basically, I was put on progesterone to help with my sleep. It didn't really do much because I had all these other things going on that I needed
Yeah.
to address. And so I believe in hormone replacement therapy and the time and the place for the right person. And each person's story is very specific and individual, which makes it complicated, right? But I think that these foundations that we've already been talking about is if you can work on those and have a good strategy to kind of
Yeah.
improve those processes, it's only going to help your perimenopausal journey, your menopausal journey, really the rest of your life. It's going to keep you, healthier, which is
Right.
really, as we get to this point in their life, my whole strategy has shifted to longevity. Like, I want to live as long as I can with the best health, in the best health that I can have. I don't want to have a crappy last 10 years of my life if I can avoid it, right?
Or last 20 or 30 for some,
It's
you
horrible. I
know?
know. And
It
so,
is.
I've seen my own parents deal with that. My mom now, my dad prior, and it was a huge wake up call for me that it is different. I think about health differently than before. And
Yeah.
so, but it's also makes it kind of simple, right? Like,
It does make it simple.
yeah, and
I
honoring
like
your
that.
body is just, for women, I think whether you've had children or not, that doesn't really matter.
Mm-mm.
Honoring your body for who you are and what you've been through, and not being so critical of it, and just wanting to live your best life, feel your best. Like, that is really just that ultimate goal.
I love that, Charis. I love that. So, if someone wanted to work with you, if someone was like, "Wow, Charis is amazing, and my digestion sucks, and other parts of my physical existence suck, and I could really use Charis's help," how can they find you? How can they maybe have an opportunity to work with you?
Yeah, so my practice is called Prime to Nourish. My website is Prime, the letters or the word TO, Nourish.
Huh?
If you Google my name, because it's kind of different, my website pops up pretty quickly.
Okay, great. And I'll put the spelling of your name in our show notes, but it looks like Charis,
Yeah, it does.
but it's Charis and then Cederberg.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Cedarburg. Yeah, and so really I've as my practice has evolved, I've tried and dabbled in lots of different ways of helping people. And really what I do is I have a 2-month program where people work with me one-on-one, and we just dive into really them as a whole person, and obviously address what they're complaining and really kind of work on these foundations, because these are the foundations for anything. I do functional testing in my practice. So I do things like stool
Cool.
testing, organic acids, food sensitivities. I use bioenergetic testing, which is a little bit different than what a lot of people have heard of. But I kind of, as a nurse, I think I love to use those modalities, and they give us wonderful information. But I use those after I've worked with someone for a couple of months. And sometimes we can implement it a little bit earlier, just kind of depends on the person, because you can't ignore the foundations, right? So the trouble, just real quickly, that I was getting into is I would do a stool test on someone and find all this wonderful information that we can address, but maybe their blood sugar balance is terrible and we haven't even thought about that, right? Or maybe their
Got
circadian
you.
rhythm is off and their sleep is off. And so all we're doing is honing in and focusing on the stool test results. And so I've gotten much better results with my clients doing it in this method. And so this is the way that I work with anyone. A lot of people do really are interested in testing and kind of the way that I use testing, and have kind of a specific way of doing it, just my kind of anal self that I am, my nurse self. So that's kind of the second step, and some people don't need that or want that, and that's great. And then they have a great plan to go on and continue to improve their health. And then of course I'm always here. And really, that's the primarily how I work with people. I'm developing some online programs because I've never really done that before.
Yeah.
There's a need for it. And so watch for that coming in
Cool.
2024. I think this episode will be coming out early in January. So
January, yeah.
yeah, so I'll have wait lists on my website, and you can always schedule a discovery call with me. So I talk to people and just hear their story and what they're struggling with. And we talk about if what I do would be a good fit for them. So
That's so great. I love that. Hey, real quick, logistically, if I live in Minnesota and you're in Colorado and I was going to work with you, how do I get my poop tested? Because it's not by you. Are there, so I
yes,
don't have to mail my poop to you?
No, I
Okay.
don't personally look at your poop.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, so the poop goes to the outside company. So I primarily use Diagnostic Solutions, which is the
Okay.
company that runs the GI map. So the GI
Okay.
map is a very specific type of stool test that's a little different than a lot of the other tests on the market. So you would have the test kit sent to you, and then you would collect it and have all the instructions. And again, I have my little nurse nuances and teach you how to set it all up because it's not always easy to figure that out.
Yeah.
And then you send it in to the company, and then I get the results.
Oh, so kind of like Cologuard, but different.
Samples at home, you send them in, and then I get the results. And then,
Awesome.
yeah.
So y'all, you don't have to live in Golden, Colorado to like work with Kara. This was mind blowing for me. I mean, some of the stuff I've already been doing. And so I'm like seeing a difference and I'm like, oh, that's why this is different for me. But then there's still things where I'm like, oh, yeah, totally. I do need to work on that. That's why I still get bloated sometimes. And so this was mind blowing for me. And if you're listening, I hope this was mind blowing for you. I just like want to clap and just like give you some love. Although I don't think the video will pick up the clapping, but oh my gosh, this was mind blowing. I'm so grateful you're here. Listeners, I hope you're grateful because Charis, you're amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so fun to connect with you, Jen. So thank you.
Yeah, this was great. This is so amazing. And if you're looking to work with Charis, I'll hunt down her website and put it in the show notes. And if you're not following the Self Love Woman Way podcast yet, just for women ADHD entrepreneurs, please follow and make sure you share, especially this episode, because my gosh, what woman doesn't need this, ADHD or not? So, all right, y'all, take care.